This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. You can visit their store by using my referral link in the description below. Hi everyone, I'm Nizzanotes, and today is Saturday, and that means it's time for Nizzanotes, my weekly vlog series about limited magic. We are in the very early stages of Phyrexia All Will Be One. So far I've just done a handful of drafts during the early access event. I've also, of course, done all of my set review. Pre-releases are this weekend, and it'll release on Arena later in the week. As usual, in the super early stages of a limited format, I like to do a rundown of the best commons and uncommons in each color. This is kind of a Cliff's Notes version of my set review, which is obviously like 4 hours long or whatever. It's sort of a way to look at the big highlights in each color, and of course commons and uncommons are the most important cards in limited. We'll also do a crack-a-pack at the end of the video, talk about a pack one, pick one scenario in this brand new format. Let's dive in now, though, with a look at the best commons and uncommons in each color in Phyrexia All Will Be One. We'll start with white, where I think the third best white common is Duelist of Deep Faith. This format is a pretty aggressive one, and Duelist of Deep Faith is a great 2-drop that's difficult to block, and it has one of the key mechanics in the format, Toxic. It is one of the better commons and uncommons you can play on turn 2 in this format. A 2/2 first strike is pretty much relevant all game long. It's really good with tricks, it's really good with equipment. It just overlaps into basically every white deck in the format and performs really well. The second best white common is Planar Disruption. This is, an upgraded pacifism effect that shuts down a wider variety of cards entirely because it turns off their activated abilities now. It still has some downsides. There's some bounce in this format at lower rarities. There's some sacrifice in the format at lower rarities, and that always makes Planar Disruption a little worse, but it is still a premium removal spell and a card you can take pretty highly. And at number 1, I have Basilica Shepherd. A 5-mana 3/3 flyer that adds these 2 mites to the board is big. The blue-white deck has all these triggers when artifacts enter the battlefield. You can often play this, and it has this big immediate impact on your creatures who can already attack because of those triggers. They've also got Toxic, so they fit into the Toxic sort of aggro decks. This just gives you a lot for 5 mana. And I think the best white uncommon is Ossification. This thing is an incredible removal spell. Lets you exile creatures or planeswalkers for only 2 mana. It is an aura, it's an Oblivion Ring style effect. So if your opponent can deal with it, they get the thing back, but even if they do, that's the worst case scenario and you've disrupted them significantly, there's not much of a downside that comes with the fact that this can only enchant basic lands, or that it enchants a land in general. You're mostly going to be playing basic lands in limited, and there really isn't any land destruction in this format that makes this easier to destroy. It still dies to all the same sorts of things that all Oblivion Ring effects die to. For all 4 of these cards, these 3 commons and Ossification, I think they're all first pickable, and I think white is one of the better colors in the format, especially when we're looking at commons and uncommons. Let's move now to blue, where I think the third best common is Bring the Ending. I don't normally include counterspells in sort of my preliminary list of the best commons and uncommons, as it tends to take a particular format for them to be pretty good, but I actually like Bring the Ending a reasonable amount. The base form of this card isn't great. It's nice to have in the early stage of the game where it can counter something pretty easily, but I love the corrupted upside here, which means it can counter anything in the later stages of the game. So generally, the way games play out, you have a huge chunk of the game where this is good, whether it's in the early game or once you have 3 or more poison counters on your opponent. It's nice to have, if you're not adding to the board, which you have to in this format, if you're not adding to the board on turn 2, leaving this up isn't bad, lets you counter whatever their 2-drop is or their 3-drop is, and you end up doing okay. And then in the later stages of the game, it can have a really big impact too. I think the second best blue common is Gitaxian Raptor. This 3-mana 1/4 flyer comes with oil counters, and it can use up those oil counters to get +1/-1. It works well with all of the oil counter stuff that's in blue-red, and in the format in general. It works well with Proliferate, and it can just, because its stats are so customizable, you can find lots of situations where this can attack effectively. If the skies are open, it can hit pretty hard in a hurry. Even if you're only removing 1 oil counter a turn to turn it into a 2/3, that's some significant damage to come out of your 3-drop. And in situations where it can't quite rumble because maybe your opponent has something that could actually block it, it's an okay 1/4 as a defender. And then I think the best blue common is Mesmerizing Dose. This locks down, freezes down a creature and proliferates. I mean, that's some nice value to have. I mean, it has all the same sorts of downsides that planar disruption does, except it also doesn't shut down static abilities. So it's not amazing, but I do think it's blue's best common. Unfortunately, I think blue is pretty shallow at common. There's a lot of like decent blue commons, but there aren't that many that are exceptional. I think blue's best uncommon is exceptional, and that's Unctus's Retrofitter. A 3-mana 2/3 with Toxic 1 is already kind of a passable card in the format, but the fact that this can turn an artifact you have in play into a 4/4 is great. There are a lot of curves where this is just insane. Like if you play the 1/1 Flying Vigilance on turn 2, and then play the Retrofitter on turn 3, Prophetic Prism on turn 2, Retrofitter on turn 3, anything that makes a Might token, and then a Retrofitter on turn 3, like, it can give you a huge advantage in the early game, and then even in the late game, you know, you're often really upgrading your board, not just with the 2/3, but by either making an artifact creature better or animating an artifact. The Retrofitter is really good, and I think it fits into a wide variety of decks, which I think makes it such a good uncommon. And obviously, I'd be happy to first pick this one. Let's move to black now, where I think the third best common is Annihilating Glare. You know, this is Bone Splinters at worst, and it's even better because it can hit Planeswalkers. And then it has the upside of, you know, if you just want to spend a bunch of mana to kill something, it can do that too. It's particularly good in decks that are good at making Might tokens, because then you're sacrificing something very expendable that's not really worth a card to take down something of your opponent's. There are other things you can sacrifice for value too, but that's sort of the sweetest scenario. I think the second best black common is Stinging Hivemaster, something that's good to sacrifice to Annihilating Glare. You know, a 3-mana 3/2 with Toxic 1 is nice, and then it replaces itself with a 1/1 with Toxic 1. Those two bodies are good for all the sacrifice stuff, and it's just a good rate in general. And then I think the best black common is Anoint with Affliction. This thing's great. It's kind of like Bring the Ending, but it's way better because it's less situational. You know, it's not a counter spell, it's just a removal spell. In the early game, it'll be good because it can kill things you need to kill. And then in the later stage of the game, once your opponent is corrupted, it can kill everything for 2 mana, which is a great deal. Then I think the best black uncommon is another removal spell. It's hard for this not to be the best black uncommon, and that's Drown in Ichor. 2 mana for -4/-4 is going to kill a huge percentage of creatures in the format, and it has Proliferate tacked on. If it didn't have Proliferate, there's a good chance it would still be the best black uncommon, so that tells you how nice it is that you also get that additional bit of upside. I think I'd be reasonably happy, by the way, to first pick either Anoint with Affliction or Hivemaster, and definitely Drown in Ichor. Next, we're moving to red, where I think the third best red common is Barbed Batterfist. You know, this is a 2-mana 3/1 on a base level, which isn't amazing, obviously, but this is a format where, especially in red, you're generally pretty aggressive, and this is a pretty nice 2-drop to have because it makes this 2/2 token, and then you have this equipment left behind that can give you some value. There are equipment payoffs in the set that make it even better. You know, +1, -1 isn't exactly amazing, but the fact you can move this around so easily, stick it on evasive creatures, move it somewhere because that creature likes being equipped and stuff like that, like, that's really good. I think the second best red common is Volt Charge. This one's a reprint. It was good last time. It's good this time. It's kind of like Drown in Ichor. It's not quite as good, but it is a removal spell that has Proliferate tacked onto it, which is great. If you're in the blue-red spell/oil deck, you know, all the cards that can Proliferate, then they're also non-creature spells, are great because it basically puts 2 counters on all of your payoffs, and that's what Volt Charge does, in addition to 3 mana for 3 damage just being a good rate anyway. And then I think the best red common is Hexgold Slash. You know, this is a format where you either need to be putting things on the table or removing things from your opponent's side of the table efficiently, or you're going to end up dead. And Hexgold Slash is great for that. 1 mana that does 2 damage to everything, to anything, I guess. That kills a lot of creatures in this format. There are a lot of undersized creatures here, and it kills a lot of them, but then it has this toxic upside where it can kill even more things for only 1 mana, sometimes giving you completely insane deals where you pay 1 to blow up a 4-drop or a 5-drop, and that feels incredible. I think both Volt Charge and Hexgold Slash are cards you're pretty happy to first pick. I think the best red uncommon is Rebel Salvo. Another removal spell. You know, this card's crazy because even without the affinity for equipment part, it would probably be red's best uncommon. With it, it has the potential, especially in red-white, to be a 1-mana spell that does 5, which is crazy. But getting it down to 2 is very doable, and 3, like I said, already a great rate. So an amazing uncommon. And that brings us to green, where I think the third best common is Oil Gorger Troll. This one, it doesn't fit into every deck, but it's a pretty nice card in any sort of grindier, mid-range sort of deck in the format that cares about oil. If you want to stabilize against aggressive decks in this format, something like the Troll is pretty important. Gaining that life and generating, drawing you a card is a really good deal. It can really help you stabilize. The sort of downside is poison's a thing here, and against some decks, gaining the life doesn't matter that much, but, gaining life is still pretty important. It helps you stabilize against aggro decks, and the 2-for-1 this gives you is good too. It is sort of a build-around common in a sense, but I think it's such a good one that I like having it here. I think the second best green common is Ruthless Predation. This is a card we've seen before in not this identical card. I think it was called Epic Confrontation before, and it's always good. +1/+2 ends up letting a whole lot more creatures successfully fight and kill an opposing creature while not dying themselves. As usual, it's a green removal spell that involves targeting one of your creatures, so you have to be careful, but in the right window, this can be very powerful. And then I think the best green common, and kind of probably in competition with Anoint with Affliction for best common in the set, that card is Contagious Vorak. This starts as a 3-mana 3/3, fairly passable stats, but then it has this modality where you can either choose to gain life or you can grab a land. This can really give you 2-for-1s for a very low cost, and that's what makes it such a good common. Now, the best green uncommon was tough. I think green is incredibly deep at uncommon, which you probably know if you watched the full set review. I gave like a B or higher to several uncommons. In the end, I think, and this is one that could really end up getting shook up, because I think Incubation Sac, Infectious Bite, and Viral Spawning are all great. And, there's also the 4-mana 4/4 Toxic 3 that can proliferate. Like, there's just a lot of really good green uncommons. But in the end, I think Viral Spawning is the one that I like the most. It's not that hard to get a 2-for-1 out of. I love this sort of card that you can cast early for an efficient body, and then a little bit later, you can cast it again. If you draw it late, paying 6 to get 2 3/3s is often enough to help turn a game around for you. So I like Viral Spawning a lot. Like I said, there are so many good green uncommons. This is one where I could see things changing in terms of how I rank them as I play more of the format. But for now, I have Viral Spawning as the best green uncommon. All right, so those are my picks for the best commons and uncommons in each color at this very early stage of the format. Now, let's do the first crack a pack of this new format. What that means is I'm going to show you a pack one, pick one. I'm going to tell you how I feel about each of the cards in them at this point in the format, and then explain what I would first pick. So first common is Surgical Skull Bomb. This one's fine. Basically all the spell bombs are fine. It's hard for them not to be. They replace themselves. This one kind of has the bonus of being blue, and that's a bonus because there's a bunch of stuff that triggers when you cast non-creature spells. It's also not bad if you're more interested in Infect, or Toxic rather, because you can use it to get a blocker out of the way and hit them with something with Toxic. It has some nice uses in the format, certainly not something you first pick. Infectious Inquiry is next. This card's okay. I mean, right now, the idea of playing this on turn 3 in this format isn't awesome, but you can definitely do it. The fact it gives your opponent a poison counter isn't bad either. Definitely don't want to first pick it. Hazardous Blast is next. This is a card that really aggressive decks in the format can use to just finish the game. It's particularly nice, like in the spell deck. It can also pick off a lot of creatures. There's lots of X1s in the format. But it's kind of a role player that only works in some pretty specific, like all-in aggro decks, which are there and certainly exist. But, it's not a card you take early at all. It's the kind of card that'll come back and make your deck, and you don't need to spend an early pick on it. Next up, it is Thirsting Roots. This thing's okay. You pay 1 mana, you get 2 different modes, that neither of which is that powerful, but it does fix your mana for you, which matters some, in the early game, and the Proliferate on the right board can have a real impact. Again, not a card you want to take early. Next up, it's Complete Devotion. This is one of the really nice tricks in the set. Aggressive Toxic decks are definitely a thing in white, and the fact that this can allow you to just plow through a blocker while also drawing a card, that means it gives you a 2-for-1. It's super efficient. Right now, it is what I would take in this pack. Surely it won't be what we take in the end, but right now, I think it's the best card we've seen. Next up, it's Gold Warden's Helm. A pretty underwhelming equipment. You'll play it in red-white, but you don't want to take it early. Testament Bearer, you know, this thing can offer some decent value as sacrifice fodder. The thing I really don't like about it is it can't even block might tokens, and being able to block things with infect and not die is kind of important in this format, and the bearer is awful at it. So really not a huge fan of it. It's like, and you know, it's sort of like Hazardous Blast. It is sort of a role player in the right deck. You don't need to take it early. Thrill of Possibility, another pretty mediocre common. You'll play it in the spell deck. Don't really play it anywhere else. You know, as is the case with most sort of tormenting voice type cards. You know, they're nice for helping you find more spells. They trigger your spell stuff. But if you're not doing spell stuff, it's kind of a bad card draw spell. Escaped Experiment, you know, a mediocre 2-drop. This pack, in terms of commons, is pretty weak. Like, still on Complete Devotion here, which does tell you something about the format that I'm in on a trick. But the cards we're seeing in this pack are very underwhelming overall. Like, Surgical Skull Bomb is probably the second best card for us. The Experiment, yeah, I mean, it's a decent 2-drop in a format where you need them, but definitely not something you want to take early. Copper Longlegs, kind of the same thing. I'm not impressed with the card overall. 2-mana 1/3 reach just doesn't do a ton these days. If this format had like a bunch of 1/1 flying tokens, it would probably be better, but it doesn't. A lot of the good flyers in the format can just attack into it and not care. So those are the commons. Yeah, I think it goes Complete Devotion, Skull Bomb, Escaped Experiment. So not the best commons. Uncommons are looking better, though. We've got Evolving Adaptive, which does immediately become our new first pick. It is a 1-drop in a format. I mean, it would be good in any format, but it's a 1-drop in a format where playing early, powerful creatures is really important. You know, it comes in as a 1-mana 1/1, and then it just keeps getting bigger. Whether you're proliferating, whether you are playing creatures, which you're going to be doing, that have higher power and toughness than it just grows throughout the game and ends up giving you way more than 1 mana worth of value. It's certainly what we would take now. It is a lot better than Complete Devotion. We've got a Signpost Uncommon too, and Cephalopod Sentry. This thing's pretty good. I mean, the artifact deck, I think, is pretty real. There's all of these aggressive when an artifact enters the battlefield triggers in the set, and the Sentry really thrives in blue-white decks, as it should, as a Signpost Uncommon. But I do think Evolving Adaptive is just a better card, you know, not even taking into account the multicoloredness of the Sentry. I think you would pretty much always pack one, pick one, take Adaptive over Sentry. You're more likely to play it because it's not gold, and, you know, a really powerful 1-drop is better than a really good 4-drop most of the time in this format. So definitely in on the Adaptive still, but Cephalopod Sentry is now the second best card in the pack. Then we've got Font of Progress. So we do have one dud uncommon. You know, milling people out is mostly a pipe dream in this format. You can do it with the Jace Planeswalker. Not so much with Font of Progress. You know, you end up using a card and sinking mana into this thing in a format where both of those things are a bad idea. So, you know, it's awful. So definitely Evolving Adaptive now. And then we have a rare that's playable, Zenith Chronicler. It's a 2-mana 3/1. When someone casts a multicolored spell, their opponent gets to draw a card. There aren't a lot of them in this format. I mean, this is mostly just a 2-mana 3/1 artifact. Occasionally, you can net a card. Obviously, it's symmetrical, so you don't really want to cast multicolored cards when it's in play. The good news is it can trade off or whatever, and you can get rid of it before you ever play multicolored things. You have control over it in that sense. That said, it's definitely not, you know, anything you want to first pick like ever. And it's probably worse than Complete Devotion. It's probably not worse than Escaped Experiment. I think I would take the Chronicler. There's a weak pack, though, where the 4th best card in it is Zenith Chronicler, but I think that's what we're looking at here. So that is this week's Crack-A-Pack. We'll do another one next week. Next week, I'll also talk about, you know, once I get some more drafts under my belt, the early overperformers and underperformers in the format. So that does it for today. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like it and share it. If you want to catch future videos, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. If you want to catch up on past editions of Nizzanotes or a bunch of other content here on this channel, you should see some playlists on your screen shortly. Thanks for watching.